The wine was a 2009 Chateau Petrus, and it cost €400 a bottle, and it was currently soaking through the front of a cream wool sweater that had come from a second-hand shop in Edinburgh for £12. And the woman wearing the sweater was standing at the edge of the Ashford family's dining room with red wine spreading across her chest in a pattern that looked, in the candlelight, almost like a wound. Celestine Ashford was still holding the glass. She had not dropped it. She had placed it on the table with the specific deliberateness of someone who has done something intentional and wants the intentionality to be legible. She was wearing a Chanel suit in blush pink, the latest season, the kind that arrives in a boutique before most people know the season has been announced. And she was looking at the woman she had just doused with the wine, with the expression of someone who has made a point and is waiting for the point to be received. The dining room of Ashford House was the kind of room that announced its own importance from every surface. Dark paneled walls in 17th century oak, a table of polished mahogany that seated 20 and currently seated 14, crystal chandeliers whose combined value exceeded the annual revenue of a small business, and silverware that had been in the family since the 1800s and was polished weekly by staff whose primary function was the maintenance of the impression the room created. The candles were white, in silver candelabras, and they cast the specific warm light that expensive rooms use to make themselves look better than they are, which in this case was already very good. Into this light, the red wine spread, and Celestine said, into the silence that followed the spreading, a silence in which 14 people held their breath with the specific, collective quality of an audience that has just seen something unprecedented. She said, "Peasants don't sit at this table. I don't know how many ways I need to say it. 1. What would you do if this were you? If you were standing in a room that cost more than most people's entire lives, wearing a second-hand sweater now soaked in a wine that cost more than your weekly grocery budget, surrounded by people who were looking at you with the expressions of people watching a thing that is beneath them behave and things beneath be expect. What would you do if the man beside you, the man who had told you on a bench in a garden in St. Andrews 8 months ago, that he had never met anyone who made him want to be a better version of himself? What would you do if he reached out and touched your arm and said quietly, 'Let's just not make it worse. Let's just not make it worse'?" The woman in the wine-soaked sweater looked at the hand on her arm. She looked at the wine on her chest. She looked at Celestine Ashford in her blush Chanel with the empty glass still in her hand and the expression of a woman who has never once, in 31 years of life, experienced a consequence. And she thought, 14 minutes, because that was how long it was going to take. She knew this with the precision of someone who has arranged for a thing to happen and knows the arrangement's timeline. The summit security sweep had been scheduled. She had known about it, had known it was happening this weekend in this part of the country, had known that the route would bring the escort past Ashford House within a window that included this dinner. She had not planned for the wine. She had not needed to plan for the wine. The wine was simply Celestine being, at last, and completely, herself. 14 minutes. She looked at Celestine. She said nothing. She breathed, once, slowly, and she went completely still. Her name, her actual name, the one she had been born into and had been living with at careful distance for the past 2 years, was Princess Annalise Marguerite of the House of Casteran, Crown Princess of the Kingdom of Casteran, a constitutional monarchy in Northern Europe with a population of 4 million people, a 500-year continuous history of self-governance, and a treasury that international financial journalists described, when they described it at all, as among the most stable sovereign wealth positions on the continent, which was accurate and which significantly understated the case. She had left at 25. The decision had been 2 years in the making, and the execution had been 6 months in the doing, and it had involved a conversation with her father, King Edvard II, who had governed Casteran for 22 years, with the specific patient gravity of a man who understands that power is a trust rather than an inheritance. That was the most honest conversation she had ever had with another person. She had told him that she needed something she could not have from inside the palace at Casteran, or from any of the positions that her life as crown princess made available. She needed to know what she was when the crown was not visible. She had grown up in a world where every interaction was filtered through the knowledge of what she was and what she would become, where every friendship had the shadow of the throne in it, where every relationship was complicated by the impossibility of knowing whether the interest was in her or in her position, where she had never once walked into a room and been unknown. She needed to know who she was in the rooms where no one knew her. Her father had listened with the complete attention he gave to things that mattered. He had asked 4 questions, and then he had said, "You carry the emergency line, always." "Yes," she said. "Elspeth knows where you are." Elspeth was the chief of household, 60 years old, in the position for 30 of them, a woman whose discretion was structural rather than professional. "Yes, and you come back," he said. The last thing, said in the voice of a covenant, not a command. "I'll come back," she said. She meant it with the part of her that does not permit itself to mean things she does not mean. She became Anna Mercer. She had always been interested in cartography, had studied it at the Royal Academy at Casteran before she left, had found in it the specific satisfaction of a discipline that is simultaneously art and science, that requires both precision and the capacity to see a landscape as a whole. And she had found in Edinburgh a position with a small private firm that specialized in the restoration and reproduction of historical maps. The work suited her in the way that work suits people when it engages the actual structure of their intelligence. She was precise. She was spatially skilled. She had the patience for the meticulous and the eye for the whole. She lived in a flat in Stockbridge, a neighborhood in Edinburgh that was quiet and particular in the way of places that have not been discovered by anyone who would ruin them. The flat had high ceilings and a kitchen window that faced a walled garden that belonged to the building next door, but which she could see, and which she looked at every morning with the specific pleasure of something beautiful that requires nothing from you. She shopped at the market on Saturdays. She walked everywhere. She wore clothes that she liked rather than clothes that communicated anything, which was a freedom she had not fully understood she was missing until she had it. She met Oliver at a lecture, a public lecture at the University on the cartography of disputed territories in 16th century Europe, which she had attended because the subject was directly relevant to a restoration project and because the speaker was known to be both knowledgeable and genuinely interesting, which was rarer than it should have been. Oliver Ashford was there because his firm, a development consultancy that worked in historical preservation projects across the UK and parts of Europe, had a project in the relevant geographic area, and he had decided, with the specific intellectual honesty of someone who prefers to understand something properly before acting on it, to attend the lecture before committing to the project. They ended up sitting next to each other because the lecture was full and the seat beside her was the last available. He sat down, said, "Sorry, excuse me," with the genuine politeness of someone who means it rather than someone performing it, and did not say anything else until the lecture ended, which told her something immediately. He had come to listen. Afterward, in the corridor, he said without making an opener of it, "Did you agree with his position on the Venetian boundary maps?" Because she had made a small sound during that section of the lecture, not loud enough to be rude, just audible to whoever was sitting next to her, and he had noticed and was curious. She had a position on the Venetian boundary maps. She told him what it was. He had a counterposition that was interesting and partially correct. They stood in the corridor for 40 minutes while the room emptied around them and the university's evening cleaning crew began their work at the far end, and the overhead lights clicked off in sections, and they were still talking. He was 34. He ran his consultancy with 2 partners, both of whom she would later meet and find exactly as he had described them: competent, principled, slightly obsessive about their work in the way of people who have found the right work. He had grown up in the Borders, the son of a man who had been a school teacher and a woman who had been a librarian, and he had worked his way to where he was through a combination of scholarship, genuine ability, and the specific, unglamorous patience of someone who builds things rather than inherits them. His family had money, substantial money, she would learn, through a property and financial holding that had been built across 2 generations. But he did not carry the money in his manner, or in his clothing, or in the way he talked about what he valued. He was the same person in every room she saw him in. She had watched for this, carefully and without announcing that she was watching, because it was the quality she most needed to confirm, and the one most consistently absent in the men she had met whose other qualities were present. He was the same in the corridor after the lecture, as he was at a dinner with colleagues, as he was on an early morning walk along the water of Leith, where they had gone on their 4th time together, because both of them liked walking more than they liked restaurants, and had found this about each other and done something about it. She let herself fall in love with him slowly, and then all at once, which is the only way it actually happens. She was honest with herself about this in the way she was honest with herself about things that mattered, by naming them when they were true, rather than waiting until the naming was convenient. She did not tell him who she was. She told herself she would, before serious, before permanent, before anything that would make the not telling a retroactive dishonesty rather than a deferred conversation. And then Sirius arrived before she had managed the timing, and she told herself before the year mark. And then it was 10 months in, and he had introduced her to his family for the first time, and the family had changed the conditions of everything. His family, his parents, Jeffrey and Margaret Ashford, were pleasant people of the kind that money has been good to without making them aware of the goodness. Warm in a slightly distracted way, comfortable with their own comfort, not cruel. His brother Daniel was 30, working in finance, straightforward and genuinely kind, in the unremarkable way of people who have not yet had occasion to test their character. And then there was Celestine. Celestine was 31, 2 years younger than Oliver, and she had the quality of someone for whom the accident of birth position has been taken as a personal achievement. She had gone to the right schools, moved in the right circles, worn the right things since the age of 16, and had arrived at 31 with an identity constructed entirely from the external architecture of belonging to the correct rooms, the correct families, the correct occasions, without any visible interior content beyond the maintenance of that architecture. She looked at Anna at their first meeting, a Sunday lunch at the London townhouse, which the family also maintained, a house in Chelsea with a white stucco facade and a dining room where every surface was either antique or expensive or both. And she looked at her with the expression of someone completing a rapid assessment and reaching a conclusion that required no further information. Oliver said you were in maps, she said, in the tone of someone confirming a suspicion. Historical cartography, Anna said. Restoration and reproduction. The sound that contains an entire verdict. Do you enjoy it? Very much, Anna said. It sounds very solitary, Celestine said. The word solitary doing the work of several words that would have been less deniable. This was the pattern. In the months that followed, across the Sunday lunches and the dinner parties, and the country weekend at Ashford House that the family organized in August, Celestine's manner toward Anna had the specific, sustained, low-grade quality of water finding the crack in a wall, patient, continuous, always finding the same weak point, which was Anna's failure to be what Celestine considered the appropriate person for Oliver's position. The comments were never direct. Direct would have been addressable. They operated in the register of observation, noticing things aloud, describing things accurately while selecting which accuracy to deploy. Anna's sweater at one lunch was so cozy, that vintage look, very Edinburghian. The flattened Stockbridge was sweet, very authentic. You can really feel the neighborhood. The work at the cartography firm was important, I suppose. Someone has to do it. Me, the last one, was Celestine's masterwork in the genre. A sentence that appeared to be a compliment, was structured as a compliment, and contained in its final clause the entire and complete dismissal of everything Anna was. Oliver noticed some of this and managed it with the specific approach of a man who finds direct confrontation with his family more costly than indirect management. He would steer conversations. He would change subjects. He would, occasionally, say to Celestine in a voice that was more gentle than the moment required, "Celestine, that's enough." Enough was doing a lot of work in that sentence. It was the enough of someone who has set a limit, but has not decided what happens if the limit is crossed. He said to Anna after the August weekend, a weekend in which Celestine had commented on Anna's wine knowledge, "I always think it's charming when people are enthusiastic about things they're still learning. Anna's clothing, you always wear the most interesting choices. And Anna's professional timeline. When do you think you'll want to do something more substantial?" He said, "She's always been like this with people I bring home. She comes around eventually. Just give it time. Give it time." Anna had looked at him and had thought, "I can give it time. I am very patient. Patience is something I have in extensive supply. But patience is not the same as permission, and I want you to know the difference." She said, "Oliver, when she says those things, what I need is for you to say something, not after, not to me later, in the moment." He had looked at her with the specific expression of a man who has heard an accurate thing and is deciding whether to act on it or to defer the action. "I know," he said. "You're right. I'll work on it." He worked on it in the way of someone doing something difficult that they have not fully committed to doing, which produced incremental and inconsistent results, which produced in Anna the specific, patient, and increasingly complete assessment of a person who is watching a pattern and understanding what the pattern means. The country weekend at Ashford House in October was the culmination of this pattern, and she had known, when Oliver told her about it, that it would be the culmination, because she had been watching patterns long enough to know when they were reaching their end. The weekend had been organized, the organization appearing casual, being deliberate, by Celestine, who had invited, in addition to the family, 7 of her close friends, all of them connected by the specific social thread of people who have always had money and consider this a qualification. Among the 7 was a woman named Philippa Stanhope, who had been in a relationship with Oliver before Anna, a relationship that had ended 2 years before Anna met him, but that Celestine had been keeping warm in the way that certain people keep options warm, with consistent inclusion in the family's social occasions, with the specific pointed mentions of shared history and Anna's presence, with the seating arrangement at this particular dinner which placed Philippa 2 seats from Oliver and Tay. Anna at the far end of the table near Celestine. The seating arrangement was not accidental. Anna had understood this from the moment she saw the placement cards, because she had grown up watching state dinners being organized and had learned that where people are placed at a table is never accidental, that the table is a document and the seating is its argument. She sat where she was placed. She had worn the cream wool sweater, which was warm and which fit her well and which she genuinely liked, and which had cost £12 from a shop on Nicholson Street, and which she had known, putting it on that morning, was not what the room would expect. This was not defiance. It was simply accuracy. She had chosen the thing she liked, and what the room expected was not her concern. The first course had gone without incident. The second had produced 2 of Celestine's observations, one about Anna's sweater. "It's very cozy. I always love a vintage knit." And one about the cartography firm. "Do they do anything with digital mapping, or is it purely the analog?" Both of which Anna had received with the level attention she gave to things she was documenting. The third course was when it happened. Celestine had been talking about a gala she had chaired, a charity event for something involving horses, the specifics less important than the social position the chairing communicated. And she had been talking about it with the confidence of someone who expects their audience to find it as interesting as she finds it. And the audience had been finding it as interesting as Celestine expected, because the audience was composed of people who understood that Celestine's position in this particular social ecosystem required them to find it interesting. And then she had looked at Anna. She had looked at Anna with the expression of someone who has decided that the time for the subtle approach has passed, and the time for the direct approach has arrived. And she had said, "Anna, do you do anything? Charity, I mean. Anything with actual weight." The anything with actual weight hanging in the air above the table like a remark that is waiting to be a statement. Anna had said calmly, "I serve on the board of the Northern European Historical Preservation Society. We work with governments and private collections across the continent." Celestine had absorbed this. She had found in it the thread she needed. "Governments," she said. "Which ones, specifically?" "Several," Anna said, "because Oliver mentioned your family is European. Somewhere?" The somewhere managing to make Europe itself sound like an imprecise claim. "Yes," Anna said. "And your father is in, what did Oliver say? Public service?" "Something like that," Anna said. Celestine had looked at her for a moment, and something in that moment, something in Anna's calm, in the specific level quality of her attention, in the absence of the defensiveness or the explanation reaching that Celestine's questions were designed to produce. Something in that moment had caused Celestine to reach a decision. She had reached for her wineglass. She had stood, slightly, from her chair, and she had upended the glass over Anna's sweater, with the precise, controlled movement of someone who has decided to do something, and is doing it with the care that deliberate actions deserve. The wine had spread, the room had held its breath, and Celestine had set the glass down and said, "Peasants don't sit at this table." I don't know how many ways I need to say it. Oliver said, "Celestine." Celestine said, "No, I have been patient." Every Sunday, every weekend, every dinner where she sits here in her charity shop clothes, and her vague family, and her little map job, and pretends that she belongs here. She doesn't belong here, Oliver. She has never belonged here. And I am tired of being the only person in this room with the honesty to say it. The room was very quiet. The 7 guests looked at their plates or at the table or at various points in the middle distance that allowed them to be present without being accountable for their presence. Oliver looked at his wine glass. Philippa Stanhope, 2 seats from him, looked at Anna with the expression of someone watching a situation they find useful. Anna looked at Celestine. She looked at her with the complete, unhurried attention she had been giving Celestine for 8 months. And the look contained all of it, every observation, every catalog entry, every Sunday lunch, every very cozy, and every actual wait. And the look was entirely still. And then she heard it, not with her ears first, with her body. The vibration that is not one person moving, but many, moving together, in the coordinated way of people who have drilled the coordination to the point where it is automatic. The rhythm of boots on a gravel approach, becoming boots in a corridor, becoming boots on the parquet floor of the Ashford House entrance hall, and then the double doors of the dining room opening. They came through in 2 files of 25, 50 men in the formal security attire of the Casteran royal household, dark blue, with silver detail at the collar and cuffs, the Casteran eagle in silver at the lapel, moving into the dining room with the coordinated, unhurried precision of people for whom securing a space is a function performed many times, and performed now as a routine part of a scheduled perimeter sweep for a diplomatic summit, taking place 20 kilometers away, a sweep whose route had been planned 3 weeks ago, and which included, by the specific logic of security planning, the major private estates in the surrounding area. They moved into the room. They spread to their positions, along the walls, at every exit, at the windows. This took approximately 20 seconds. The dining room of Ashford House, with its 17th century paneling and its mahogany table and its Chateau Petrus and its 14 dinner guests, became a secured space in 20 seconds. And during those 20 seconds, every person in it was still with the specific stillness of people who have encountered something they do not have a category for. Then, the officer at the front of the formation looked across the room. He was looking for threats. He was performing the assessment function he had been performing for 12 years of service in the Casteran Royal Household Guard. He was looking at the room with the trained, systematic attention of a professional security officer. And he saw her. He saw Anna Mercer, Crown Princess Annalise Marguerite of the House of Casteran, standing at the edge of a dining table with red wine on her sweater. And he saw her with the immediate, complete recognition of a man who has dedicated his professional life to her protection and has been trained to recognize her regardless of context, regardless of what she is wearing, regardless of the circumstances in which she appears. He stopped. He said, in Castellani, a single word, a word of alert, a word that every man in the room had been trained to respond to in a specific and immediate way. 50 men turned, 50 men looked, 50 men saw what their officer had seen, and 50 men in formal blue security attire with silver Casteran eagles at their lapels came to attention, heels together, backs straight, heads up, and then bent at a precise 90-degree angle in a simultaneous bow that produced, in the dining room of Ashford House, a sound that was not quite a sound and not quite a silence, but the specific quality of 50 trained professionals performing a formal act of recognition in complete unison, which is a thing that, once you have heard it, you do not forget. The room was entirely silent. Celestine Ashford, who had been standing with her hand on the back of her chair and the empty wine glass on the table in front of her, and the expression of a woman who has made a point and considers the point made, had a new expression. It was not one she wore regularly. It was the expression of a woman whose face has received information her identity was not built to process, and is doing what faces do in those moments. It was losing its shape. The architecture of it was intact. The features were all where they had been, but the certainty that animated them, the absolute and structural conviction of a woman who has never been in a room where she was not the most socially significant presence, was not present in the face anymore. It had left. It had left quickly and completely, the way light leaves when its source is removed. The officer straightened. He looked at Anna. He said in English, with the formal precision of someone delivering a protocol statement in a foreign language, Your Royal Highness, we apologize for the intrusion. We are conducting the scheduled perimeter assessment for the Casteron summit. We did not anticipate. It's all right, Captain, Anna said. Her voice was the same voice she had been using all evening. Level, clear, the same voice she used for everything. Please complete your assessment. I'll be leaving shortly. Of course, Your Royal Highness. He inclined his head. He made a signal with his right hand, a small, precise gesture, and the 50 guards straightened and resumed their function. The perimeter assessment, the systematic movement through the room, the professional inspection of exits and access points, performed with complete efficiency and without any further acknowledgement of the dinner party they were moving through. The dinner party that was, at this moment, not a dinner party anymore, but a collection of 14 people sitting at a mahogany table in a 17th century room trying to understand what had just happened the evening. Oliver was looking at Anna. He was looking at her with the expression she had seen most clearly in the moment at the university lecture, when he heard her make a small sound about the Venetian boundary maps. The expression of someone who has encountered something he had not anticipated and is experiencing genuine, unperformed surprise. Except that this version of the expression was larger, significantly larger. It was the expression of a man revising, at speed, a substantial portion of his understanding of his life. He said, Anna. She turned and looked at him. She looked at him with the full, unhurried attention she had been giving him for 10 months, and she allowed herself for a moment the specific and private grief of someone who has found something real and has watched it fail to be sufficient, which was a grief she had been managing since August and was now completed. Hello, Oliver, she said. Celestine found her voice. It had gone somewhere during the 50-person bow and had returned, but it returned at a different register from where it had been, slightly higher, slightly thinner, the voice of someone whose confidence in their own footing has been disturbed. She said, I don't understand what— No, Anna said. She said it quietly, not with the performance of drama, with the simple, clean accuracy of a correction. You don't. She turned to face Celestine fully. My name is Princess Annalise Marguerite of the House of Casteron. I am the Crown Princess of Casteron and the heir to its throne, which has been the governing institution of a sovereign European nation for 500 years. She paused. One pause, precisely measured. The pause of someone who has spent a lifetime in rooms where pauses have diplomatic weight and knows exactly what weight this one should carry. You called me a peasant. I want to make sure the designation is on the record. Eek! Celestine's mouth opened. Celestine's mouth closed. You poured wine on me, Anna said, deliberately, in front of 14 witnesses. I want to make sure that's also on the record. She looked around the table. 14 witnesses looked back. Several of them had the expressions of people who would very much prefer not to be witnesses, but who are undeniably, irreversibly witnesses. Good. She looked at Oliver. I should have told you, she said. I intended to. I kept waiting for the right moment, and the right moment kept not arriving, which was my failure, and I own it. She looked at him steadily. What was not my failure was every dinner, every Sunday, every occasion at which your sister said what she said, and you did not choose. I needed you to choose. You did not choose, not consistently, not when it mattered. She paused. That was the thing that was always going to be the end of it, and I knew that, and I stayed longer than I should have because I wanted it to be different, and I was wrong to stay. Oliver said, Annalise. Anna, she said. You've always called me Anna. That's fine. She almost smiled. You're a good person in most of the ways that count, the ways that I needed, those you didn't have. That's not a condemnation. It's just accurate. She looked at the room one more time, at the 14 people at the mahogany, in their formal clothes and their careful expression, at Celestine, who was standing with the wine glass still on the table in front of her, and the blush Chanel suit, and the Graf earring, and the face that was still trying to reassemble itself into something that communicated the authority she had arrived at Philippa Stanhope, who had arranged her expression into something approximating neutrality with the visible effort of someone doing an impression of a feeling they do not actually have. At the 50 guards in the room, who were completing their perimeter assessment with the professional efficiency of people who do not permit personal interest in a situation to interfere with their function, but who had positioned themselves, Anna noted, in a way that placed 6 of them between her and the rest of the room, which was not incidental. She picked up her jacket from the back of her chair. The jacket was good wool, dark navy, plain. She put it on over the wine-soaked sweater. She did not attempt to address the wine. The wine was what it was. It was on the record. The captain appeared at her side. "Your Highness, the vehicles are outside." "Thank you, Captain." She walked toward the double doors. The guards near the doors moved, not with aggression, with the coordinated precision of a formation reorganizing around a principle, and the doors were held open by two of them, and she walked through. The entrance hall of Ashford House was pale marble and high ceilings and a staircase that curved upward in the specific, self-regarding way of staircases that have been designed to be seen descending. She walked through it without looking at. She had looked at enough rooms to know which ones deserved her attention. Outside, the October night was cold and clear, with the specific clean quality of country air after dark, a quality she had always loved, that she associated with the grounds of the palace at Casteran in the autumn, with walks before breakfast in weather that required a coat and gave back the specific pleasure of cold air consciously entered. There were 6 vehicles outside, matte black, armored, with the Casteran eagle in silver on each rear panel. They sat on the Ashford House gravel drive, with the quiet, substantial authority of objects that have been built to carry important things and know it. She got into the second vehicle. The door closed. The interior was warm and smelled of good leather and the very faint trace of the security protocol, a specific, barely there scent that she associated with every official vehicle she had ever been in. Something to do with the materials, something to do with the equipment, something she had never been able to name, but that her body recognized immediately as, "You are in the right place. You are where you belong." She looked out the window as the convoy moved down the drive. Ashford House receded, the lit windows, the pale facade, the specific, expensive stillness of a house that has always believed in its own importance, and has tonight been reminded that importance is not a self-granting designation. In the dining room, which she could see through the windows as the convoy passed, the 50 guards were completing their sweep. The 14 dinner guests were still at the table. Celestine was still standing. Anna looked at the house until it was gone from the window. Then she looked at her hands, at the wine on the cuff of the navy jacket, at the cream sweater beneath it. She thought about what had been real in the 10 months with Oliver, the lecture, the corridor, the 40 minutes of talking while the cleaning crew worked around them, the morning walks along the water of Leith, the way he looked when he was actually interested in something, which was a specific and genuine quality that she had loved from the beginning, and still loved now, as a quality, separate from the question of whether it was enough. It had not been enough. Not his interest or his genuine goodness or any of the real things she had found in him. Because power, the specific, consequential kind of power that she would one day exercise over a nation of 4 million people, requires a partner who can choose, consistently, and without conditions, and when it costs something to choose. Oliver could not do that. He was not built for it. This was not a failure that diminished him. It was simply a truth about the specific requirements of her specific life, and she had known it since August, and she had stayed longer than she should have, and now she was not staying. She reached into her jacket pocket and took out the phone, not the emergency phone, the ordinary one, and she called her father. He answered on the second ring. He always answered on the second ring, as though the first was for the breath that preceded the decision. "Annalise," he said, her name, complete and specific. "Papa," she said, "I'm coming home." A pause. "Are you well?" "Yes," she said. "I'm well. I have wine on my sweater." Another pause. In it, she could hear him deciding whether to ask about the wine and concluding, with the accurate instinct of a man who has known her entire life, that the wine would be explained in its own time. "Elspeth will have the rooms ready," he said. "Thank you," she said. "Drive safely," he said. Not because the driving was her responsibility, but because it was the thing parents say when they mean something larger, and have chosen the smaller version of it for the moment. "I will," she said. She put the phone away. The convoy moved through the dark country roads toward the motorway, the Casteran eagles on their rear panels catching the occasional light of an oncoming car, silver on black, sovereign and exact. She thought about what she would tell her father when she got home. Not about Oliver, not about Celestine, but about the 2 years, about what she had found out. She had needed to know who she was when no one in the room knew what she was, and she had found out. And the answer was the same person, the same attention, the same patience, the same specific intelligence, the same capacity for love that had always been there, unchanged by the crown's presence or absence. She was the same person in the second-hand sweater as in the state gown, and the knowledge of this was permanent, and she was taking it home with her. In the days that followed, things occurred at the pace that legal and social consequences tend to occur, fast enough to be decisive, slow enough to be permanent. The Ashford family's social position, which had been built like most social positions at that level, on the accumulated endorsement of other people who had similar position, developed, in the week after the dinner, a particular fragility. Social positions maintained by mutual endorsement are vulnerable to the withdrawal of that endorsement, and the 14 dinner guests, each of whom had their own position to maintain, each of whom had now been witnesses to a specific and documented sequence of events, made the calculations that 14 socially pragmatic people make when their position and their association are in potential conflict. The invitations that previously arrived for Celestine Ashford began to arrive with less frequency. The charity boards on which she sat, the horse event, the two others that derived their social cachet from the same ecosystem as Celestine herself, underwent the kind of quiet governance review that boards undergo when a member's presence has become a liability. Celestine, who had organized her entire identity around the belonging to the correct rooms, found the rooms becoming less available. Not all at once, not with any dramatic announcement, but in the gradual, specific way that exclusion works when it is operated by people who are too sophisticated to make it explicit. The Casteron Crown's legal team, meanwhile, had submitted documentation to the relevant authorities regarding the deliberate destruction of property, the wine, the sweater, which had its own value as evidence of intentional public humiliation, and which had been documented by the security footage that the 50 guards' body cameras had captured, because Casteron Royal Household Guard members wear body cameras during all active security operations, and the Ashford House dining room had been an active security operation. The documentation was not criminal. The threshold for criminal liability in the matter of wine on a sweater requires more than the law usually delivers. But it was civil, and it was specific, and it was the kind of documentation that, when submitted alongside a record of the full evening's events to appropriate authorities, produces the specific, cold clarity of a situation being placed permanently on record. Oliver sent a message, then a letter. Then, through a mutual acquaintance he had correctly identified as having access to the right channel, a request for a conversation. She did not respond to any of them, not because she wanted to punish him, but because there was nothing productive that the conversation would produce. And she had learned, was still learning, was going to spend the rest of her life learning, the specific discipline of not having conversations that are not going to produce anything useful, just because having them would be emotionally comprehensive. Completeness is not the same as usefulness. She was choosing usefulness. She returned to her work. Not the Edinburgh firm. She was going back to Casteron, and the work she was returning to was larger than the firm, though it contained the same skills and required the same qualities. But she returned to her cartography, to the map she had been working on, finishing the restoration project she had been in the middle of when everything accelerated, because finishing things you have started is a form of respect for the effort you have invested in them, and she had always believed in that form of respect. She sat in her Stockbridge flat one last time, on the morning before she left, and she looked out the kitchen window at the walled garden that belonged to the building next door, and that she had been looking at for 2 years, without it ever asking anything of her. She looked at it with the specific, quiet attention of someone saying goodbye to a thing she has genuinely loved. Then she picked up her bag and she left. True power does not need to announce itself at dinner. It does not need to be wearing the right thing, or sitting in the right seat, or speaking in the register of people who have always had access to the right seats. It can sit at the far end of a mahogany table in a second-hand sweater and a wine stain, and it is still what it is, completely and without diminishment, waiting with the patience of something that knows the waiting is temporary, because power that is certain of itself does not perform. It does not explain or defend or reach for the recognition of people who have decided not to give it. It simply waits, and the world eventually catches up. And when it does, it catches up in the form of 50 men in Casteron blue, bending to 90 degrees in the dining room of a house that thought it was the most significant thing in the room. And the silence that follows that bowing is the most complete silence in the world, because it contains everything that was always true and was simply waiting to be visible. Did Celestine Ashford earn every consequence? The invitations that stopped coming, the boards that quietly reviewed her membership, The record that will follow her name in the room she cares most about being. If you felt the specific satisfaction of watching someone who called a crown princess a peasant discover in real time what the word actually means, then smash that like button right now. Share this with someone who needs it in their day, and subscribe to this channel because we are never going to run out of stories about people who know exactly what they are, even when no one in the room believes them. And every single one of those stories is worth every second of the wait.